Should I Quit or Do You Want to Fire Me? By Bejgrowicz. Foreword. I love the Misfits and I have a great deal of respect for Glenn Danzig, Jerry Only, Doyle, and company. It hasn't always appeared that way, I know, but I had to navigate some pretty complicated seas throughout 1995 to 2001. Without question, those challenging dynamics resulted in some puzzling actions on everyone's part. If given the opportunity, I'm of the belief that we'd all work together quite differently now. But those were unstable times and, as they say, hindsight is 20/20. Regardless of what went down, the band earned my respect by being pioneers in the worlds of music and graphic design. They followed their passion, as well as Glenn's phenomenal vision, and smashed the mold for generations to come. They were like no other band at the time and have served as the blueprint for thousands since. Working with the band is something I cherish to this day. Although it was rough going for much of the time, I wouldn't trade that experience for anything in the world. The Misfits, alongside fellow American bands like Bad Brains, Minor Threat, Black Flag, and the Dead Kennedys, are a rite of passage for those seeking to stand in opposition to the mainstream. Because of this enduring legacy, I get asked about my work with the band more than any other singular act in my career. During casual conversations with strangers, I answer only the most basic questions for those trustworthy fiends closest to me. However, I've willingly shared the more intensive tales with them. After all, my working relationship with the band went well beyond the music, and my experiences deliver mystique-busting insight into both the construct of the releases as well as the context in which they were created. Therein lies the interest in these stories, the goings-on that a fan couldn't see when they went to the record store to buy Collection 2, the Coffin box set, or Static Age. The behind-the-scenes legalese nobody truly understood when they found out they weren't going to be able to own a copy of 12 Hits from Hell. These are stories that open one's eyes to the business side of music. The politics behind bandmate versus bandmate and band versus record label. These are not always pleasant things, of course, and sometimes ignorance is bliss. Be careful what you wish for, right? Or, as Hunter S. Thompson is quoted as saying, the music business is a cruel and shallow money trench, a long plastic hallway where thieves and pimps run free, and good men die like dogs. There's also a negative side. For the record, everything I experienced is not contained within these pages. This is not a tell-all, as there are many facets of this work that are simply not for public knowledge. Nor is this gossip. After 20+ years, it's simply a documentation of the story behind my efforts to put together cohesive and exciting releases for a legendary band and a rabid fanbase. Thank you for listening. Bejgrowicz, 12/2017. The Static Age isn't coming yet. I laughed the first time I heard some of the material on Collection 2. I honestly did. I wasn't the only one, but sadly, we weren't laughing for long. What made me laugh was how clearly a portion of the material didn't sound like the Misfits at all. I was caught off guard and truthfully stunned. It's common knowledge that over a quarter of this album's tracklist, comprised of the 1986 re-recordings of the Walk Among Us material and Cough Cool, wasn't performed by the Misfits. After someone involved with the tracks in question attempted to convince me otherwise, there remained internal pressure to get the band's voice, its songwriter, and its most popular figure involved in Caroline's release campaign. If it had been up to me, Collection 2 would never have seen the light of day. Why? Simply put, it was disingenuous and went against my vision to properly represent the band's legacy with passion and without confusion. But that's not where this story begins. Before I was hired by Caroline Records, I was a mom and pop sales rep for Caroline Distribution. After working there for some time, I became friendly with Lyle Preslar, the former guitarist of Minor Threat, Sam Hain, and the Meat Men, who was then general manager of Caroline Records. He was busy putting together a deal with the Misfits and was coming over to my desk asking me for input on what tracks remained to be released from the band's storied 1977 to 1983 timeframe. After quite some time, and many further discussions, I proposed to Lyle that he should hire me so I could work on this full-time and oversee the releases. He agreed to the idea, gave me a job with those duties and more, and titled it something like Alternative Marketing Manager. I was just 25 years old. By early May 1995, Lyle and I had met with Jerry and Doyle in the Caroline offices for the first time. The guys arrived at our 26th Street location in full stage get-up, and the office's halls were alive with excitement. It had been quite some time since the band had a presence in the offices, and with new and old releases to come, everyone was energized. We sat down in the office's conference room and gave Jerry and Doyle the floor to pitch us on what they had in mind, and vice versa. This was my first taste of working with Jerry and, to say the least, he was a larger-than-life figure. The vibe in the room was of excitement and hope, and it was a thrill to be part of it. One must understand just how well the Misfits, Sam Hain, and Black Aria sold through the distribution arm of the company. They sold a lot, year after year after year. The legacy of Glenn's phenomenal vision was being discovered by legions of kids every year, thanks to 1. The greatness of the Misfits and Sam Hain, 2. Metallica, one of Glenn's most impactful ambassadors, was the biggest band in the world, and 3. Danzig's original lineup continuing to tear it up through 1994's 4P. Those original meetings with Jerry and Doyle gave Lyle and I a lot to think about, and we put our heads together to create an overview of what we wanted to do and when we wanted to do it. On May 10th we sent our first letter to Jerry, Doyle, Franch and Robo, or Caiafa, Licata, and Valverde, aka CCLV, regarding our intentions for releases over the next couple of years. This included Misfits, the planned 9 singles, a box set of the original singles on both CD and vinyl that would include each single with original art and would feature cool box art, Halloween 1995, Static Age including the originally mixed 14 tracks from the reel-to-reel tapes we hoped Glenn had in his archives in Lodi. The last line about this title reads, "We would hope Glenn would be into the idea." Evil Live on CD, early 1996, Earth AD on CD, CS, and LP in its original version, with original art, and the possibility of remixing the record if tapes were available from Glenn. Spring 1996, Walk Among Us. Yes, Walk Among Us. At the time, with all of the legal issues, the brothers spoke of possibly getting the rights back on the album and therefore Caroline could include it in our plans for release. We discussed restoring the original artwork and possibly adding alternative versions as bonus tracks. This obviously never came to fruition and the rights to the album remained intact. The complete box set, a set containing everything plus tracks from Legacy of Brutality and Collection 1, both of which would be obsolete once we release everything in its proper form, along with a disc of rare and unreleased tracks like the original Cough Cool single, In the Doorway, Mephisto Waltz, and more that Glenn had promised during the contractual process of the year before. What wasn't included in our plans was Live at Max's, something Jerry brought to us for potential release. It featured Glenn's vocals from the original 1978 Christmas shows at the legendary Max's Kansas City in New York, a club that attracted artists from Andy Warhol to Robert Rauschenberg and musicians like David Bowie, Mark Bolan, and Alice Cooper, but the musical performances were newly recorded overdubs of Jerry on bass, Doyle on guitar, and, I believe, Dr. Chud on drums. The latter two weren't even in the band at the time of the original recording, of course, and to me, this reeked of the revisionist overdubs that were applied to past recordings by Glenn. For the life of me, I could not understand how Jerry could justify this decision, and to this day I still can't. In hindsight, I wish he had brought us the original recordings to see what Alan Douches could have done with them in the studio. Needless to say, we respectfully listened to the sales pitch to get their version released, but it never felt right. Once we settled up with Jerry and Doyle, we approached Glenn with the revised proposal. Back then, Caroline was fully aware that we would not get both Jerry and Glenn on the same page and agree to the same things. So, to release anything, Lyle and I needed only one party's approval to move forward with a project, be it CCLV's or Glenn's, not both. Further, an approval could also be secured when a party was notified of our intentions but they didn't respond within the accepted time period of 10 days set forth in the agreement. Failure to respond could be a mistake or by intention. It didn't make a difference. That was key because it was the only reason anything was ever released during that period. Despite our hopes to the contrary, Glenn didn't get involved early on, but we were still able to attain the rights to release Misfits material via non-responsive approvals through CCLV. Moving forward, for one reason or another, the singles box got bumped and our focus turned to Static Age and the Teenagers from Mars single to precede the album's Halloween release on September 12th. The single was to be one-sided and released on 4 different colors of 2,500 copies each. The blank side of the single was going to feature a crimson ghost skull etched into the vinyl. Teenagers was selected from the 14-track session due to its drastically different personality from that of the Horror Business single version. Jerry's bass was absolutely brilliant and I loved the slower pace that represented the band's 1977 to 1978 style. Slam, fucking, dunk. The crowning jewel of this Halloween campaign, of course, was the Static Age album itself. As of June 12, 1995, the original release plan for the CD included a special, limited edition package that would have been sold only through January 1, 1996, before being replaced with a standard edition. The packaging being discussed was what was eventually used in the Coffin box set in 1996. The inspiration for the design was based on a glow-in-the-dark copy of Spiritualized's Pure Face CD that Lyle had. We planned on a gatefold jacket for the vinyl, embossed lettering on the cover, both photos and lyrics inside, and marbleized vinyl. We printed up tons and tons of the Static Age as coming posters and the excitement level was extremely high. All the while, there was an underlying hope that Glenn would come on board with our plans, get involved, and lend his endorsement to what the label would release. He had been relatively quiet to this point, but then on July 18th, he was quiet no longer. That day I received a fax from Glenn's lawyer showing the master tape details from 1987 for a proposed Misfits 2 CD. As of that time, I had yet to receive any master tapes from Glenn. master tapes that were owed to us by the agreement both he and CCLV signed earlier that year. I replied to Glenn's team letting them know that while I was happy to receive the initial details on this proposed album, I cannot say for sure what we do or do not have because I have not heard the tapes to know if they are the alternate versions of the tracks we have or are at this point still seeking. I went on to list a sampling of songs owed to Caroline Records like In the Doorway, Rat Fink, Return of the Fly, Cough Cool, and She, 1977 versions, Feline Nursery, Harpies in the Night, West End Avenue, alternate versions of 20 Eyes and Violent World, and the entire sessions from which 3 hits from Hell were culled. After going back and forth with his lawyers, with little to no movement forward, I reached out to Glenn and his manager on July 28 to clear the air and further request what we were legally owed. This resulted in Glenn and I getting on the phone for the first time on August 1. We discussed the Collection 2 master as well as specific songs and sessions. It was during this phone call that Glenn told me that Feline Nursery was only tracked as Spinal Remains in the studio and that it might have once existed on a cassette but he wouldn't know where it was after all these years. He also informed me that Harpies in the Night and West End Avenue may have been on cassette at one time, having maybe been recorded via a live room mic during rehearsal, but he didn't have anything of the sort. Based on that conversation, I followed up with everyone the next day confirming that Glenn was getting us the Cough Cool 7-inch master, Rat Fink, Return of the Fly, and In the Doorway. I wrote these tracks will be included in a second collection that will first appear in the complete box set which we, at this point, see happening in winter 1996. I added, this leads me to some of the items we would like to see included in the box set which I discussed with Glenn. I would love to see the extensive booklet have a few archival sections, art, poster, t-shirt, record cover detailed discography, lyrics, photos, and stories. Anything Glenn would have and deem as integral to the history of the band would be very appreciated. We receive any enthusiasm with open arms. Additionally, I went on to discuss Static Age and its pending Halloween release, saying, these are the sessions that were to be the first album. Static Age. We are going to send Glenn a CDR master when mastering is completed. Look for this to arrive sometime next week. We had to wait to see if Glenn had this on master and after our discussion, was confirmed he did not. Adding, I know that all involved will be pleased with the sound and graphics with this piece. We plan on releasing Static Age on Halloween this year. Lyrics, photos, and stories surrounding the making of this record are welcomed. We are on a very tight schedule with this release and would appreciate anything you have to contribute to this project as soon as possible. For various reasons, we could not possibly think of getting the box set together for the holiday season. Static Age will be out to capitalize on the holiday sales. Discussions continued with Jerry and CCLV on Static Age while we awaited feedback from Glenn's camp. On August 10 in a fax to Jerry, I noted that Glenn's reaction to the Static Age news can be summed up by his manager's response of, "What the hell is this?" On the 16th, less than a week later, I faxed Glenn and his manager a fully detailed release schedule that we had fine-tuned over the summer. The next communication is August 21 where I inform Glenn's manager that we haven't heard any feedback and that a response regarding Glenn's cooperation in our release plan is urgently requested. This is where things begin to unravel in a big way. According to my notes, somewhere between the 21st and 23rd, Static Age is discarded and Collection 2 is slated for release on November 7th. I cannot recall exactly why we were pulled away from our original plans to work with Glenn on this title, but I can assure you neither myself nor Jerry was happy about it. Regardless of how I felt about Collection 2, it appeared as if it was indeed going to kick off our campaign. According to a letter to Glenn's manager from Lyle on August 23, the masters for this album were to be released to me by Glenn's lawyer the following day with additional masters coming from Lodi, New Jersey by August 30. Glenn was to supply appropriate photographs and all lyrics for the songs on the album. The letter stated in bold, complete artwork elements, all photographs, images, song lyrics, and copy, are due no later than Friday, September 1. What followed is key but sadly, as you'll come to understand, was not adhered to. In the event that Danzig fails to comply with any of the above requirements, or fails to deliver anything required on schedule, Caroline will release Static Age on October 31, 1995. In any event, Caroline will release Static Age at a time of its choosing in 1996. For the record, it had been established without question that Glenn was not a fan of Static Age and felt that it already came out via Legacy of Brutality. At some point during this period, however, he relented on Static Age but only if Collection 2 came out first in our campaign. We received no response to that letter from Glenn's camp and I sent a further note on the 25th asking for their compliance to this schedule while sending them lyrics Jerry had prepared in order to help offer Glenn a head start. I requested from them a good, old graphic that hasn't been used would be great for the cover art while following up on everything else needed for the release. Days later, I received a copy of the Misfits 2 CD master and sent Glenn's camp my feedback stating that we had better quality versions of several tracks from the Static Age master and that Attitude gets cut off a bit. Further, I requested the deletion of the Earth AD tracks in exchange for songs like Rat Fink, Return of the Fly, In the Doorway, etc., so that we are giving everyone more unreleased tracks and fewer versions they may already have. Soon after, I did receive what was deemed all of Glenn's master tapes owed to us according to the deal. According to the agreement, he was to send us everything he had, as it was now all owned in full by Caroline Records, be it master tapes or rehearsal cassettes or anything of the sort. I again requested everything for Collection 2, including art, band photographs, lyrics, and copy on August 31st with no response. In a fax from that date, I noted how I mocked up artwork over the weekend and would have an artist work everything out. I stated, in case there are no graphics or art in the file, I will have to go to CCLV for something. I let their camp know that I would fax them anything before it goes to print so that we are both happy with the art and that we are on the same page. There cannot, though, be any major delays put to the artwork. Let's be flexible. On September 5th, 4 days beyond the required due date for everything regarding Collection 2, I received nothing from Glenn or his camp. A week later, I moved forward, giving the designer the Crimson Ghost image, text for the release, lyrics, and art direction to the best of my ability. Then on September 13th, I inquired to Glenn one last time about Mephisto Waltz and whether it was a legitimate Misfits song or not. I suspected it to be a Sam Hain track, as most others did, and warned that I would remove the song if it was found to be just that. I asked for his feedback so that I could alleviate everyone's concerns regarding that track. To this request, I received nothing in return. Along with the cancellation of 12 Hits from Hell, that period was the lowest point for me and my working with the band. I was left standing between one man, the man whose vision, songwriting, and voice drove the band, and the band members who said they didn't play on much of the Collection 2 tracklist. In a fax to me, Jerry understandably graded Collection 2 with an F/0, and Doyle added, P.S. I have never heard of Mephisto Waltz in my life. Adding insult to injury, I was told by a former member of Sam Hain that this was not Sam Hain. I knew enough that Glenn had posthumously revised original recordings in the past, and my heart was sure he was doing that now. Naturally, Caroline was caught in the middle of a rock and a hard place. Throw away a track no one had ever heard but had been teased as a Misfits song for nearly 10 years in the press? Choose sides as to who I did or didn't believe? I didn't put myself in that position. Of course, I was put there by the band. In just a matter of months, I was pitched projects by both sides that weren't, as they say, on the up and up. Part of me wanted to quit, but another part wanted to stick it out, take the heat, and make shit happen in a good way, after the Collection 2 dust settled. Despite what awaited us, I'm glad I stayed on and was able to accomplish what I did over that period of my career. As we all know, Collection 2 was released, but the worst was yet to come. I flew to Los Angeles on October 16th to discuss the box set with Glenn and his manager and to show him the plans designer Roger Gorman and I had created. However, when I arrived, the first words said to me by Glenn's manager were, "We've got a problem." We were sitting at a large conference table, the manager to my left, and Glenn across from me. Glenn was wearing a Danzig 3, How the Gods Kill t-shirt and sunglasses. Sunglasses he took off only when he rubbed the bridge of his nose, while growing more and more upset with me. As I later noted in a letter to Caroline's lawyers following this meeting, this was my first impression of any trouble with Collection 2, and I felt ambushed. Despite the fact that Collection 2 was Glenn's creation. Despite the fact that he never supplied me with artwork, lyrics, photographs, or factual copy for the album, that he missed any and all due dates in the production schedule, and the fact that the record was filled with question marks of authenticity, Glenn tried to blame its condition on me. Be it incorrect lyrics or legally vulnerable artwork that could put the release in question, it was all being put on me. After discussing Collection 2 first and the box set second, we wrapped up the meeting. I left the offices and called Lyle in New York. He picked up, asked me how the meeting went, and I replied, "Well, should I quit or do you just want to fire me?" Adding insult to injury, Glenn's lawyers soon drafted up a letter with statements against me and my work, requesting that Caroline withdraw the album and its artwork and replace it with a cover that is approved by Glenn. It's worth noting that their letter, amongst many things, also stated that no offers by me to change the artwork on future pressings would be accepted. I was absolutely furious. During the time I was having to deal with all of this, Static Age should have been pressed, Mephisto Waltz shelved, Jerry and Doyle happy, and my efforts turned to the box set. Instead, I took time out of my work to counter, point by point, each and every statement they claimed. Then, after reviewing my thorough retort, Caroline's lawyers responded to Glenn's lawyer with a letter that unequivocally shut down any and all attempts by Glenn to deprive the label of enjoying the benefits of its agreement with the band. The letter itself was a thing of beauty, and it still excites me when I read it so many years later. For me personally, after being blamed for a situation I never wanted any part of in the first place, it was an empowering feeling to know the label stood behind my efforts and defended it with everything they had. Have you seen my Coffin? After Collection 2 came out and it was time to move forward, I decided that I was going to do what I felt best from there on out. I was going to ignore everyone else and put together releases that a fan like myself would want. No noise coming at me from either side. I'd be driven solely by my love of the music. As I mentioned earlier, Glenn did in fact get me a stored collection of master tapes in late August 1995, and I went to pick them up from his lawyer's offices. I was, as they say, like a kid in a candy store, and there's really no other way to put it. It was a lot to sort through and my mind was reeling. I had to call a cab and load everything myself, while sweating like a fiend, before heading back to the Caroline offices to catalog everything and create a new game plan. Not all of the tapes were new to Caroline, of course, many were redundant. While I clearly have a ton of paperwork and notes from those years, one of the glaring omissions in my archives is a master list of tapes I received from Glenn. That said, here are some notes on what I recall from that time. Thankfully, the Static Age quarter-inch reels, featuring the 14 mixed tracks, and multitrack masters, featuring the entire session, were in the pile. Without these multitrack tapes, In the Doorway would never have seen the light of day. I recall picking up a quarter-inch reel box with Die Die My Darling written on the outside. I opened it up with great excitement only to discover that it was empty. I had hoped, of course, that this was the rumored 1981 original mix with Googie on drums. There was no sign of the original 1981 Archangel recording. Number 1981 Fairlawn session. No original master or true source for the Cough Cool single from 1977. Due to this, I acquired two sources for consideration. 1. A DAT from Erivan, and 2. A bootleg vinyl copy from my friend Vincent Lee. Ironically, the latter was best and Alan did one heck of a job mastering that record for use in the box set. There were the original multitrack masters from the Horror Business sessions at CI Recording. They're riddled with false starts, complete unreleased takes, and studio banter. Classic stuff. I had hoped for the multitrack masters of Earth AD to be included. Reason being, if I could sit here today knowing that Static Age came together as it did, Caroline released the 7-inch box set like I wanted them to. More on this to come. 12 Hits from Hell was released as planned, and I remixed Earth AD to its fullest potential. We'd have an incredible sounding output worthy of representing the band's 1977 to 1983 lifespan. Instead, the fans have 3 compilations that piecemeal the band's material into a confusing, orderless series. Moving forward, throughout the end of the year, I spent my time working with Aji, package manufacturer, Roger Gorman, design, Dave McKean, illustration, Alan Douches, mastering, and Jerry for photos and his infectious enthusiasm. The CD package originally conceived for Static Age was now going into effect along with 3 silver ink injected black slim lines. Nobody had created a coffin-shaped box before and everyone, except for the accounting department, was excited. This was a very, very expensive box set with custom dies and costly processes at every step, and to say that some were nervous would be a fair assessment. The accountants had their revenge in the long run, however, as they saw to it that the packaging was less costly after that first pressing of 50,000. The big move? The 4 beautiful black plastic cases were downgraded to 2 standardized brilliant boxes with simple, black and white inserts. That move alone saved the label a lot of money on every copy manufactured thereafter, of which there were many. As I noted, I was working with Jerry Moore around this time because he would engage with me and put in the effort to help our ideas make better releases for the fan. He and I had it out several times during those years, but it was all healthy back and forth, especially when one considers the volatility of the situation. Without question, Jerry's enthusiasm, commitment, and love for the band is infectious and, at times, overwhelming. There are far worse problems to have, that's for sure. At some point between the holidays and early February, Caroline made a change at general manager and brought back Keith Wood in place of Lyle. That was a challenging time for me, both personally and professionally, as Lyle was a friend, my first, and to this day, only, professional mentor, and the person who gave me my first real opportunity in the record business. I had to continue with my plans, explain them to a new boss, and accept Keith's input. To Keith's credit, he also did the best he could considering the situation, and while it wasn't easy for either of us, we worked together and made it out relatively unscathed. That was Keith's second tenure at Caroline and, as I understood it, he was the one Glenn worked with when Plan 9 came to Caroline during the Sam Hain years. Naturally, Keith felt that he could reach Glenn and get him involved. I understood that desire, of course, but still, I believed we were yet again about to bend over backward for someone who really didn't want to work with us. Someone who didn't want us to enjoy the benefits of our agreement. Not long into Keith's time at the label, I was made to detail all of my communications with Glenn and his camp regarding the box set. There was an underlying belief by some that I did not include everyone in those plans, nor keep them abreast of my intentions. To be fair, I can't say what Glenn's manager did or didn't share with him during that time. I had my suspicions, but dealing directly with management was proper protocol. So while Glenn may not have been shown everything or been kept in the loop as he should have, I definitely maintained communication with his camp throughout the process. In response to the request, I wrote 4 pages of detailed quotes and communications that backed up my statements. That included Glenn revising discography information for the box set's booklet in person during our October 16th meeting, as well as his approval of my Coffin idea, the enamel badge, and that he would send some old posters he had to his lawyer's office as soon as he found them. Additionally, from those notes, Glenn said, "I will never give you a publishing release on Static Age." He leaned over and painstakingly informed me that we don't have a clue and that Static Age came out already and it was called Legacy of Brutality. His manager asked me why we are stuck on the project, and I explained to him that it was the band's first album recorded in 1978 and the versions have not been released yet. Glenn interrupted to set me straight, that it is Legacy, and that kids are going to be ripped off and never buy any more Misfits releases. Also within those notes is one of my favorite and most impacting moments in the music industry. From our October 16th meeting in LA, Glenn said that he told his manager that he did not come to this meeting to act as if we were friends or anything. I told him that I did not expect that. He further explained that all he wanted to do was tell me what was cool and what sucked. He then stated, "I haven't seen anything cool yet!" And a pause. Now, don't get me wrong, I was upset when he said that, but, at the same time, I was in awe of how he can turn a phrase. Even in a meeting, even at my expense. As it had before, the dust finally settled and the box set came out exactly as we originally planned it. Sure, we had plans drawn up for a wooden box that made a creaking sound when opened, but those ideas were far too expensive, even for an ultra-limited edition version. The box was a holiday gift suggestion of the New York Times, spotlighted in Entertainment Weekly, Kerrang!, Trans World Skateboarding, and eventually sold 125,000 copies in the US, thus earning the 4-time CD collection gold certification by the RIAA in 2008. Was it perfect? Hardly. Were most of the criticisms unwarranted? Yes. Considering the conditions I had to work under, I felt pretty damn good about it and remain happy with my ideas for the set, even if they weren't considered cool by some. So, unlike Jerry giving Collection 2 an F/0, I'd give the Coffin box an A, and that I can live with. To cap off the efforts put into the set, the midnight signing at Generation Records was a massive success. Well before midnight, despite freezing temperatures, there was a line on Thompson Street that wrapped around the block and onto Bleecker. Of those whose work was featured in the box, Jerry, Doyle, Franch, Mr. Jim, and Bobby Steele all attended and signed copies for fans, as well as several Caroline and Generation employees also in attendance, myself included. Living in the Static Age. If I had to pick just one record from the Misfits to have with me on a deserted island, it would be Static Age. For me, the album delivers a wider variety of tempos, the lyrical blueprint for everything to come, and when you put it into historical context, it sounded like nothing else when it was written and recorded in 1977 to 1978. By the hand of fate, the band was afforded the opportunity to track their first full batch of songs in a professional studio like CI Recording in Midtown Manhattan. All thanks to the name blank and Cleveland's very own Pierre Ubu. The sessions were produced and engineered by Dave Akelis, who worked for Mercury and or CI since 1973, recording a variety of artists ranging from the New York Dolls to jazz legends Dave Brubeck, Sonny Rollins, and Elvin Jones. At the time of the recordings that first week of February 1978, the Misfits lineup was just a few months old, with Franch Coma joining the previous fall and Mr. Jim replacing Manny on drums just weeks earlier. Not surprisingly, this showed in their performance throughout the sessions. False starts, incomplete renditions, and rejected takes were abundant during those long days in the studio. The raw nature of their performances only added to their brilliance. However, not everything needed to achieve the musical virtuosity of Yes or King Crimson, especially in punk rock. Plus, Glenn's songs and legendary voice were so good at this point that they transcended any questions of technical prowess. I finished putting Static Age together just weeks before I left Caroline Records in the spring of 1997, and when compared to the earlier drama-laden releases, that was a breeze. One of my first temptations was to remix the entire album to give all 17 songs the same exact sound and mix. Having said that, we didn't have a budget for a full remix, and with the original mix being so great as is, the best option on the table was to mix the 3 bonus songs, She, Spinal Remains and In the Doorway, to match the original mixes from February 1978. As was the case with mixing and mastering throughout that entire period, I worked with Alan Douches at West Side Music in New Jersey. In late February, just over 19 years after the band recorded the songs, Alan and I dug into the tapes at his studio. First, however, the multitrack masters had to undergo a process known as archival baking. During that process, the tapes were literally baked in an oven at a low temperature for a period of time to help them from sticking to themselves on the reels. This process loosens the tape and allows the reels to roll smoothly through the player without tearing. This was a new concept, and the belief at the time was that you had one chance and one chance only at this process. Once you did it, that was the end of the line for the tapes and you could never go back to them. Only recently, when talking to Ian MacKaye, did he tell me that over the years he learned that simply wasn't the case. Alan and I believed it to be true at the time, of course, and while I can't speak for him, I was nervous as hell the entire time. Getting everything up on the board and figuring out what took far more time than the mixing itself. After all, the original mixes were there for us to aim toward. For that session, the bonus tracks utilized were take 3 of She, take 2 of Spinal Remains, and a combination of the 2 takes of In the Doorway. For Doorway, we used the music in the first half of the vocals from the second take of the song, and the second half of the vocals from the first. Listening to the sessions today, I know we made the right decision. I'm often asked why the Static Age bonus tracks weren't in the Coffin box set. Considering the aforementioned chaos going on throughout 1995, my not getting the master tapes until the end of the summer, these tracks only being on 2 tapes, and not available to me until a studio session was set up, and the fact that the proposed album in 1978 was never going to contain those songs anyway, I felt good about holding them until the album's standalone release in 1997. That way, those buying the album again or, for the first time outside the box set, were on the receiving end of bonus tracks as well as an immersive design treatment by Pete Ciccone, ephemera supplied to me by Steve Zing, and liner notes from both producer/engineer Dave Akelis and myself. As discussed earlier, Glenn believed Static Age was pointless because his Legacy of Brutality compilation was the very same thing. I, like many, disagree with this opinion, and for us, it's Static Age that renders Legacy pointless. Thankfully, Glenn's 1985 overdubs for Legacy, which were done on the very tapes we were working from in our mixing session, were performed not over top of Jerry's original parts but in addition to them on a previously unused track. That allowed us to simply turn down Glenn's posthumous tracks and focus on the original performances. With the previously unreleased In the Doorway being the gem of the release's tracklist, it was a true thrill to hear that song prior to my time in the studio with Alan. For quite a while I had the only copy of it in existence, a fact that wasn't lost on me. Hell, the band couldn't even tell me what the song sounded like before we retrieved it from the multitrack masters. Crazy stuff. The reason a song like Return of the Fly was bootlegged but In the Doorway wasn't is quite simple, really. It was never mixed in 1978 since the band ran out of time in the studio. Doorway existed only on the masters in an unmixed form, and to do anything with that tape meant booking studio time and spending money they didn't have all for one song. Instead, the band moved on and created new songs while that song collected dust. An additional track that I had hoped to uncover on those tapes was Feline Nursery. The real kicker? Like all of the other songs, Feline Nursery is written in blue ink on the session's 16-track phase report but, unlike the others, is crossed out and is without any tracking notations. In contrast, Spinal Remains is written below it in either pencil or black pen and is complete with tracking notes. The tease of seeing the words Feline Nursery had me flipping out but, alas, it was not meant to be. Like In the Doorway, the studio banter and outtakes added to the end of the CD weren't previously available. After hearing the session tapes we had, I instructed Alan to compile a collection of my favorite bits and pieces to round out the story at the end of the album. We had fun putting that together, and while there's more of everything from that session, that's the best stuff. Unlike the 1980 MSP recordings when all but one of the 12 songs were done in just one take, the Static Age session saw many of the songs being recorded multiple times. Because of this, here's a complete breakdown of the tracks in the order they were recorded during the 30 hours of studio time the band was granted. Track number, song title, selected take, total attempts: Angel Fuck take 1, 1 complete take. In the Doorway takes 1 and 2, 2 complete takes. Some Kinda Hate take 4, 4 complete takes. Teenagers from Mars take 1, 1 complete take. Hollywood Babylon take 4, 2 complete takes, 2 false starts. Attitude take 2, 1 complete take, 1 false start. We Are 138 take 3, 2 complete takes, 1 incomplete. She take 3, 1 complete take, 2 false starts. Come Back take 2, 1 complete take, 1 false start. Bullet take 1, 1 complete take. Return of the Fly take 1, 1 complete take. Last Caress take 3, 2 complete takes, 1 insert take. Spinal Remains take 2, 2 complete takes. Theme for a Jackal take 1, 1 complete take. Hybrid Moments take 4, 3 complete takes, 1 false start. Static Age take 3, 3 complete takes. TV Casualty take 2, 1 complete take, 1 false start. Take 1 of Some Kinda Hate features a one-of-a-kind Elvis Presley Baby Let's Play House vibe right out of the gate. The opening line delivers a distinctly different feel. Well, some kinda love. Yeah baby, some kinda hate. For their second attempt, at Last Caress, the band separately tracked the insert section, beginning when the song stops and Glenn croons One Last Caress, before the bass slides back in for the outro section. Enter at your own risk. I had left Caroline Records and moved to the West Coast, landing first for a short stint at Revelation Records in Huntington Beach, California. I remember receiving my copies of Static Age at Revelation HQ and everyone being pretty psyched. I continued working on Misfits projects, consulting with Caroline on all things regarding the band, and so on. One of the projects initially developed, but not executed, was a singles box set. The name, Enter at Your Own Risk, was first mentioned in Thrasher magazine's notes in 1986. For a couple of years, it was the name of a proposed greatest hits compilation of Misfits tunes Glenn was putting together before he switched it up and compiled the Misfits 2 CD in 1987. Fast forward to 1997, that greatest hits project never materialized, so I resurrected the name for my project that too would never materialize. Mental note, never name a project Enter at Your Own Risk if you want it to come to fruition. I wrote a letter to Jerry from California on August 3, 1997. It featured plenty of pleasantries along with a healthy dose of our traditional battling. He eventually returned my letter to me with notes of his own, and in the midst of it all, I detailed my plans for this relatively unknown project. Title: Enter at Your Own Risk, limited to 10,000 copies worldwide. Contents: remastered versions of all the classic 7-inch singles. 8 exclusively colored vinyl singles available only in this limited edition set, including Cough Cool, Bullet, Horror Business, Night of the Living Dead, 3 Hits from Hell, Halloween, Evil Live, and the new, exclusive Enter at Your Own Risk single with great versions of 20 Eyes and Violent World. Regarding the exclusive single, I noted in my letter that of all the songs that were to appear on the Misfits 2 CD comp, 20 Eyes and Violent World were the only 2 alternate versions that remained unreleased from the original tape Glenn compiled for the proposed collection. Those 2 versions can be found on the Sessions disc and the Coffin box set, but would appear on this vinyl single exclusively as part of this special set. I told Jerry that I didn't feel that the singles box fit into the 1995 to 1997 release schedule, and that with so many Misfits records, both new and old, hitting the shelves in those years, I thought this should be held off at least until March 1998. Next to where I asked him what he thought of Enter at Your Own Risk, Jerry wrote simply, "Of course." What wasn't written in my letter was that I was working with Lance at Thing Makers in Washington State. To be honest, I can't recall for my life how I got connected with him, but Lance did beautiful special packaging for the likes of Pusshead, so that was enough for me. He created a mock-up of the box based on our discussions. It featured the Crimson Ghost on a black box with the band's monster logo die cut out of the cover. It was moving right along, but, sadly for the life of me, I have no idea why the project went away forever. Perhaps Caroline was disinterested? It's hard to say, as I have little to no paperwork from this period. Clearly, I was into the idea, and I know Lance was excited about it as well. For me, the icing on the packaging's cake was my plan to never mention the exclusive single and, instead, simply hide it underneath a false floor on the bottom of the box. Essentially, this was a secret compartment for the bonus single that everyone would have but only few would find. This was before the internet took over our lives, mind you, so word would have spread much more slowly once somebody found the minuscule notch in the box's floor. From Hell, indeed. Along with Static Age, 12 Hits from Hell is my other go-to album from the Misfits. The band was firing on all cylinders, rampaging through nearly every song in one blazing take, and by far it sounds better than any recording or mix the band ever had. Like Static Age, I wanted the 12 Hits from Hell album to give that era the transition from the 70s to the 80s, aka the Bobby Steele years, a true monument to hang its hat on. After discovering Master Sound Production letterhead with Glenn's handwritten notes that outlined side 1 and side 2 with the Sessions tracks, I began conceptualizing the album, its mixes, its liner notes, artwork, etc. It's worth noting that at this time I had no idea what I would discover on these tapes, let alone the shitstorm that would follow. First things first, however, I contacted Jerry by phone from my new home in Alabama, and we decided to play the old wink wink, nudge nudge non-responsive approval game of old. My pitch for 12 Hits was met with great enthusiasm from Jerry, and, in turn, I set out to build the album from the ground up. Second, Caroline made the approval process official by sending a letter of intent to CCLV's lawyers on May 21, 2001. The letter covered all of its bases and made it clear that the album would be taken from the original master tapes, remixed, and mastered by Alan and myself. Further, the album would be sequenced as originally intended, and the packaging would reflect a Static Age feeling via its look, feel, and attitude. Most importantly, however, it also addressed the fact that the label would not have a clear picture as to what exists on the tapes until they're transferred. The letter concluded with Caroline's request for an approval from CCLV, which went ignored and thus became an approval. You may be wondering if I also reached out to Glenn. For the record, I didn't contact Glenn with regards to 12 Hits. First, I wasn't required to, and second, I clearly attempted to work with him in the past, and those efforts were met with either silence or threats, or both. Not involving him wasn't optimum, of course, but nothing about dealing with the band ever was. Leading up to the session, I had only ever listened to the reference mixes Alan made for me on July 17th. When I arrived at West Side on the 26th, it was then that the breakdown of all the tracks and who performed them became clear. As the session unfolded, it never entered my mind to not include Bobby's guitar tracks, as they were both brilliant and integral to the songs. To say that it was a joy to dig into these original masters would be an understatement. We broke down everyone's tracks and took the time to ensure that details like Googie's bass drum found its audible space. Glenn's backing vocals were placed on the left and right in order to bolster his very centered lead vocals. Jerry's bass lines rounded out the rhythm section and offered a substantial foundation for the guitars to stand upon. Because Bobby tracked 2 guitars per song, we spread those out from left to right to deliver a sonically driving texture to every song. Adding to the guitar sound, Doyle tracked 1 guitar on 10 of the 12 songs. To make this a clear distinction, instead of muddying the wall of guitars on every track, we put his downstroking madness smack dab in the middle to act like a raging buzz saw. All told, the band's performances were smoking and the tracks laid down one after another in blistering fashion. While mixing Horror Hotel, I asked Alan to isolate Glenn's vocals to check on a lyric I had wondered about for some time. In hindsight, I'm not sure why. The lyric in question was a harmless one, but my inquisitive request proved to be serendipitous. Upon my asking to hear it, Alan isolated the live vocal from the band's scratch tracks instead of the final, lead vocals. Scratch tracks are the first takes of songs recorded during a session while the producer is testing sounds and the band is building tracks for the individual members to perform along to later. The crazy thing about this specific instance is that when Alan played the isolated vocal back, it featured an altogether different lyric. I was expecting to confirm Glenn singing "It's Up to Me When It Comes Down to Necking with Girls," as is recorded on the final vocal performance from the sessions, but, instead, he sang, "It's Up to Me When It Comes Down to Burying the Ghouls." My jaw dropped. Alan smiled, looked at me, and said, "You want to use that, don't you?" I nodded and uttered something along the lines of, "Fuck yeah, I do." And we did just that. While the live vocal had a slightly different feel and sound to it, when placed into the mix it's a seamless transition from one to the other and back. So much so that even with the album being bootlegged and passed around as it has been over the past 17 years, I've not once found a single person who's ever noticed this lyrical change. Not a soul. Naturally, I didn't have all day to listen to scratch tracks, and ever since then, I've agonized over what other original, unearthed lyrics exist on those master tapes. After all was said and done in the studio, I turned my efforts to the artwork, liner notes, and period correct images of the band. For that, I reached out to no other than my friend, Erie Vaughn. Erie was in Doyle's class in high school and they were big-time pals those years. As many of you have seen, Erie supplied me with fantastic photos that crossed over Bobby's time in the band to Doyle's replacing him, ephemera like the band's bio where they mentioned tracking a new album, and additional liner notes for the package. I took those materials, added in my own liner and production notes, and brought it all together in a package design I'm still proud of. It is here, however, with the creation of the package that the story really takes a turn for the worse. As Caroline prepared for the album's release and promotional copies were sent out to the band in September, phone calls were being placed amongst the band members and to Caroline with demands that the liner notes be changed. My opinion on those demands, as I discussed with the label, was that they were biased and/or historically revisionist in tone. I countered every single one of them, but since I no longer worked for the label, I had little to no control as an outside consultant. After handling things according to the agreement from the get-go, I'm of the opinion that the band had no legal basis to stand on with regards to forcing Caroline to shut this release down. I cannot tell you exactly the reason that the band pursued the album's cancellation, but I do tend to agree with the opinion that it's an issue with Bobby Steele getting his due. A due he earned because his tracks were on tapes that Caroline owns. A due he received in 12 Hits from Hell because of his contributions and performances throughout those sessions. Speaking of Bobby, I dealt very little with him back then. I supported him from afar, but bringing him into the equation was a serious complication, a complication that existed long before I got involved. Regardless of that, when applicable I gave the man his due and nobody can take away from him the beautiful work he delivered on those tapes. Tapes Caroline owned and had the ability to enjoy the rights to. That said, when word spread of the release, Bobby insinuated to the press that I created the 12 Hits project to capitalize on supposed successes he and his band, The Undead, were having at the time in the UK. That was utterly ridiculous and, honestly, the more people told me what Bobby was saying the more I believed that album was being cancelled because of his involvement alone. As we all know by now, the 12 Hits from Hell CDs as well as the LP artwork were destroyed, the vinyl never pressed, and the album shelved for, seemingly, eternity. Over the years, a couple of people have said to me, "Well, it's their band, their music, and you didn't involve them as you should have. What did you expect?" Their reaction doesn't surprise me, of course, as they have no idea what went on during those years, how it truly was, and what was necessary to get things done. Thus, My emotional response to someone questioning my actions is devoid of regret or empathy toward those involved. Admittedly, my reaction to 12 Hits surely had something to do with what was said publicly about its demise. During the cancellation process with Caroline, the band publicly trashed my work with complaints about artwork, liner notes, and mixes. It's safe to say that I don't see eye to eye with those complaints, nor do most others. If using period-correct imagery, telling the fans the facts behind the sessions, and offering them relevant perspectives while tapping into the band's trademark colors and symbology is wrong, then consider me guilty as charged. On the publicly given reasons for cancellation, I will forever agree to disagree with the band. In sharp contrast, I've received nearly as many compliments from Misfits fans over the years regarding my work on 12 Hits as I have the Coffin box. I have two favorite instances of this occurring. First, in August 2006 I came home from work and turned on KCRW in Los Angeles to hear Henry Rollins talking about the album on his Harmony and My Head show. He played the original mixes followed by the new mixes, and besides Halloween, he picked every single one of Alan and I's versions. His review of Vampira really nails down the approach we had with the mix, live count in. I like that. There are all those guitars but with much more definition. Glenn is clear and powerful. The backing vocals are nice and full. The chorus vocal is great. Snare is right in the pocket. The guitars are mixed together well into a dense yet sculpted wave of sound. I lived just a short walk from the KCRW studios at the time, but Henry pre-recorded the show and wasn't there for me to chime in with him. It would have been cool to do so, for sure. Second, I was with my longtime friends in Kill Switch Engage while they were playing in Pittsburgh several years ago. After their set, they handpicked the Misfits to be their outro music. Not just any Misfits, mind you, the 12 Hits album. Backstage, after the show, I said something to Jesse Leach, the band's vocalist, and he said, "Hell yeah, that's the best sounding Misfits record." I know some in the Misfits camp disagree with that statement, but I also know there are at least a couple that agree with Jesse. 12 Hits from Hell was my last attempt to work with the band on any level. I got paid for my work, the shit hit the fan, and that was that. The band officially requested that I not be involved any longer, and, as I said to Caroline at the time, I respect the band's current wishes for me not to be involved in future projects, and I will not be where I'm not wanted. Coincidentally, notwithstanding 12 Hits, nobody's done a damn thing since Static Age came out in 1997, over 20 years ago. Maybe they'll make a singles box? Perhaps even put the Coffin box on vinyl now that the format is back in full swing again after all these years? Only time will tell, but unless hell freezes over, I won't have anything to do with it. Art direction, design and layout by Tom Bejgrowicz for Man Alive Creative. Printed and bound by the FedEx store using copy machines and house papers. Designed with Bertold Accidens grotesque and Wolpe Pegasus typefaces. Official bootleg edition. 75 copies on a blue cover. 100% of net profits from the sale of this zine will be donated to the Pennsylvania SPCA, pspca.org, to support their efforts in rescuing, rehabilitating, and placing animals in forever homes throughout the state. Man Alive Creative. manalivecreative.format.com. See 2018 Tom Bejgrowicz, all rights reserved.